I've been using the MPC One Retro Edition for about a month or two now. Akai was kind enough to send it over for me to test. It's a loaner, so I have to send it back, sadly, because I have really fallen in love with this thing. And I made a few videos about it, but one of the videos I really wanted to make and one of the things I wanted to talk about is that I have this feeling that the MPC One and its friend, the MPK Mini Plus, which Akai actually sent to me to keep, and I haven't really made a video with yet because I wanted to kind of save it for this setup video. I feel like these two devices together could serve as a really good entry point for DAWless music production. Now, in one of my previous videos about the One, I'd said something along the lines of, I think the MPC One could be the best beginner Groovebox. And I want to put a little bit of an asterisk on that. So when I say beginner, I don't mean it's only for beginners. I think the phrase I should have used was entry point rather than beginner, because there's a whole lot of headroom with a device like the MPC One. For all intents and purposes, the MPC One is essentially the same brain and software and hardware internally as the MPC Live, the MPC Live 2, and the MPC X. The MPC Key 61 has a bit more RAM, and it might have an upgraded processor, but most of the mainstream MPCs besides the Key 61 have the exact same internal hardware, with just different external hardware and ins and outs and things like that. So when I say beginner, I don't mean baby's first Groovebox. And in fact, this setup and the MPC itself can be a little convoluted to learn. Before I wrapped my head around how to make beats with the MPC, first the MPC Live and then the MPC Live 2, I was often very frustrated because it felt less intuitive than other devices. But with that in mind, the reason I think this is a good entry point is because of the price to performance specifically. So there are cheaper devices, absolutely. The first thing that comes to mind is the Novation Circuit, now the Novation Circuit Trax and Circuit Rhythm, the two sibling Grooveboxes. My first Groovebox was actually technically the Pocket Operator 33 Arcade, I believe. But my first, more capable Groovebox was the Novation Circuit, the original. But I was coming from over a decade of DAW-based music production by the time I got the Circuit, and I found myself just pretty frustrated with how limited it was. Now you might be thinking, well, a beginner maybe won't be that frustrated. But I think it's worth saying when I say beginner to DAWless, I don't necessarily mean beginner to all music production. And in fact, if you're coming from a DAW, something like an MPC makes a lot more sense to me than something hyper limited in its functionality. Now, if you're a total beginner, like if we're talking about like kids, first of all, they kind of deserve the benefit of the doubt. They can learn a lot more than you might think. I started learning music production when I was in middle school and high school, and I was already using, FL Studio and Ableton by the time I was in my teens. But that said, I could imagine giving like a 12-year-old a Novation Circuit, Trax, or Rhythm, and they would have so much fun with it, and they would learn so many fundamentals as a total starting point. But I also think you could give them the MPC One and the MPK Mini Plus. And even though there'd be a lot of trial and error, and they would have to Google things, and maybe you'd want to walk through guides with them or learn with them, the reason it could be worth starting with something like this, even though it is more technically difficult, is because there's so much it can do, and there's so much headroom. And I've talked about this before, but the new instrument collection means that your sonic palette is almost endless. The ability to sample in, the ability to record audio, the ability to use a MIDI controller connected to it, or just use it by itself. I really do think you could give this to a beginner and, teach them, help them learn, but that this is a good entry point. And again, the biggest reason is price to performance. So this thing routinely retails for $700, which is a lot of money for sure, especially for a beginner, but is a lot cheaper than say the MPC Live 2 at $1,300 or the Machine Plus, which normally retails for $13 or $14, although I've seen both of those go down to $1,000. Inflation's really affecting those in a weird way. But the other way that you could get this for someone who's starting out is used. And on the used market, I've seen these as low as $400 in my local area, $400, $500 on Reverb. And so at that price, then it's only a couple hundred more than something with a lot less headroom. And so yes, it's not beginner in the sense that it's easy, for sure. Even as a fairly experienced producer, I'm always going to be kind of a beginner with a beginner's mindset or an intermediate at most. It was still a lot of work to understand the MPC workflow. So I'm not saying it's easy. I just am saying that the cost to performance ratio creates a really nice situation where for way less than $1,000, you can get an MPK Mini and an MPC One and have almost everything you need to get started with DAWless music production, from beginner level simple beats to full scale song production. I've given this caveat in my other videos, but I always finish my music in a DAW. And with the MPCs, you can actually use the software if you want to and take your songs into the software and add more VSTs. That way, I tend to export my stems out of the MPC and into something like Ableton. That's not a requirement. I've just found it to be the way I like to work. But anyway, with all of that said, let's make a beat from scratch here and let's play with these tools and talk about them so I can explain a little bit more why I think this is such a cool setup. One reason that the MPC is such a cool setup is that so many people are making different expansions for it. So for example, I have a few Bolt OPZ patch dumps, and these even have previews where Bolt sampled the OPZ and then added some effects. I have these two brass and piano collections, which I won't really use anymore now that there's the expansions or the instrument collection. I have Dunked by Child of the Corn Dog. This was like $15 or something. It's super cool. Some Reddit users in a thread I found multi-sampled the Korg M1, the Korg Prologue, the Roland SH101. Someone made this kind of synthwavy pack. And a lot of these were totally free. I've been asked to make a video about where to find all this and how I found all this. And it's a lot of it was a lot of kind of dumb luck and searching on Google and Reddit. I highly recommend just like keyword Reddit when you're searching for something. There's also specific forums for users where I found this stuff. I may put together a video, but those kind of videos tend to age like rancid milk because, you know, I made like a Timbers and Tones Ableton Push VST rack video, and then that website went down, and now I just get comments, you know, a few times a month like, hey, how do I get these now that the website's down and it's gone? And so I'm a little hesitant to advertise how to find freeware just because it might go down. But there's also paid stuff. So I also have a bunch of machine expansions that I have legally that I used an app called Kitmaker to turn into MPC expansions. So for example, we have a Chromatic Fire here, search by Kit. This one's not very drum based. Let's try Deep Matter. There we go. That's the preview I was talking about. All right. The MPC also comes with drum kits, and depending on how you get it, you also get some additional expansions. So I believe the F9 expansion, the F9 instruments, is included with most of the MPCs that sell new. And then there's this MPC factory content with all kinds of drum kits and other instruments. Now, I'm not going to necessarily go into like most basic overview one by one, step by step how to use this, but essentially you have drum kits, you have plug-in instruments, key groups, MIDI clips, I think, or clips. I actually don't know how the clips work. MIDI programs, and then CV, which I don't use because I don't use CV stuff. Hopefully not ever, just because it seems like a huge money sink, but people seem really into modular, so we'll see, maybe someday. There's also audio tracks. Audio's over here in the audio tab. So there's a lot you can do here. There's a lot you can build up and a lot you can make. Limitations that should be outlined that maybe I don't always say in every video. You can only have 8 plugin tracks, specifically these MPC plugins, in a given project. You can have a lot more drum kits and you can have a lot more key groups. And once you're using those, you're just running into CPU and memory limits versus the actual software limitation of 8 plugin instruments. That said, if you've seen my last video, you know I'm also using an OP1 field right now, and that only has 4 tape tracks. And so 8 plugins plus a lot more key groups plus a lot more drum kits is a lot of headroom. You can basically do anything you need to do. And similar to the OP1 or the SP404 or the Machine, you can resample any audio that's playing into a drum sample or into just a one-shot sample. But in the simplest terms, it'll allow you to kind of write your active plugins into a recorded piece of audio, and that'll give you more headroom if you need it. But honestly, there's so much room already. The only time the 8 plugin limit can really be an issue is if you wanted to build like a whole live set in one project, but that's not super what this device is for, although it's totally possible. Especially with audio, I think you could do it, but it is a limitation that people like Loopop have pointed out. Let's make something here. So I'm gonna actually start with a plugin. Something I was hoping for with the MPK Mini Plus was that it would let me browse similar to the way that the Complete Control keyboards let you kind of browse everything that's on the Machine Plus and standalone. And the MPK Mini Plus isn't quite that expansive. It has some features that maybe make it better for standalone versus the Complete Control because it can arpeggiate and do a few other things. It has, I believe, CV outs as well. And so it has some features on board that let it be more powerful by itself. But as a companion to the MPC, it's not quite as well integrated as I had hoped. But that said, it's still pretty cool. But yeah, something I was hoping for was that, for example, the Q links would automatically map. Yeah, this is where I would hope that these knobs would automatically match, but they don't. You can see when I'm turning these, it doesn't really seem to be doing anything to those, and that's too bad. I would really like it if these mapped automatically to the Q links on here when plugged into an MPC, but it is what it is. That said, I think that's still a nice little setup because it is such a self-contained little unit, although I will say it does default to being in scale and it defaults to chord mode, which I don't love. Mod wheel and pitch work. I don't think the joystick does anything. Pads are assigned to keys, but if you're going to use the pads, just use the pads on the MPC. This is a good amount of keys though. It's 37. It's basically 3 octaves, which is nice. Which is another reason I think this could be a good starting point. Having this much space means even though the keys are smaller than normal keys, you could learn chords and have a lot of room to play those with like a nice root note or like bass note. So yes, that was a lot of talking. I'm gonna make something now from scratch. I hope you've enjoyed the video so far. If so, consider liking and subscribing. Let me know if you have any questions about the MPC One or the MPK Mini Plus that I can answer in the comments. And I will keep working on some music and hope you stick around, but no worries if not. Minor side note, I pointed out that I like the headphone jack being on the front before. I'm realizing it's a bit of a con when trying to use these setups. I wanted to use it on my counter, and I realized I really couldn't because they just bump into each other with both of these ports that you have to have plugged in. Tap, 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 tap. Oh yeah, and these stands, I get questions about them all the time. I'm probably going to make a video just about them, a short one. These are quick lock laptop stands I've used for years, and I have a link in the description for my gear stands or gear stands at the bottom. It's an Amazon link and it helps the channel if you use that. I get a small percentage. All right. So that snare hit is too loud, so we'll double click pad mix. That rim shot rather. And closed hat's too loud. All right. Oh, yeah. So we'll go to track 2, and now we use our plugin. Another reason you might want a keyboard like the MPK Mini Plus, or any mini keyboard that has a mod wheel, is that I'm not sure there's a way to access the mod wheel as like a interface, even virtually, on the MPC. If there is, please comment below because I never figured that out. And having that simple modulation can bring a lot of life out of plugins that I thought were way simpler than they were. Oh yeah, that'll do it. All right, that's a great example of where we're gonna undo. And we're gonna make our sequence 8 bars. There we go. Oh, but in order to do that, we need to actually just double it so we keep the drums. There we go. Now it's 8. Let's get another plugin track going. Try key group. It's a really long release. That's good. Let's mix that down a little bit. Another key group. Try muted guitar. add some effects. So I think this camera is going to die in a second, so I'm going to call it here. But yes, this is a really cool beginner setup. And by beginner, again, I mean entry point. It takes time. It takes time to learn it, but a lot of really good tools take time to learn and they're worth it. But I still think this is a good entry point because of the price, because of the performance. A few of the tools here I used are additional paid plugins. So yes, this OPX4 is a paid plugin, but Hype is included. The F9 collection is usually included. If it's not, it's a $50 key group pack. And then these drums are, kit maker, but you can take your own samples. You can sample indirectly and chop them up. You can use the onboard drums. There's a lot here to get you started even without a paid plugin like OPX4. So again, I hope you enjoyed this video. Consider liking and subscribing. Thank you to everyone who's pushed us past like 7,700 or something. Ridiculous. I'm so eternally grateful. Thank you so much to my Patreon patrons who go above and beyond to support the channel and help make it happen. Some gear is free, but some gear like the OP1 Field is not. So I'm eternally grateful to anyone who watches, likes, subscribes, comments, all of that. It means a lot. And thank you so much. Have an awesome week ahead. And thank you again, Akai, for sending this over permanently, the MPK Mini Plus, and for sending over the MPC One to play around with for a few months. All right. I'll catch you next week. Bye.